In 1780, a French officer, publicly humiliated in front of his own troops by a superior who mocked his tactics, did something nobody expected. He said nothing. No defense, no comeback, no explanation. He simply nodded, turned around, and walked away. Weeks later, that same officer led his men to one of the most decisive victories of the campaign, built entirely on the strategy he'd been mocked for. He never mentioned the humiliation again. Not to prove the other man wrong, not even to feel vindicated. Because somewhere along the way, he learned something most men never learn. The less you need to prove something, the more power you actually have. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why that's true. With neuroscience, with Stoic philosophy, and with a 2,000-year-old story about a man who took this idea to an extreme that might shock you. But first, we need to understand something happening inside your brain right now, in this very second. Something that's been sabotaging you since childhood without your permission. Here's something that's going to sound strange. The same brain circuit that lights up when you break a bone is the exact same circuit that activates when someone leaves your message on read. Neuroscientists proved this with a simple experiment. They excluded people socially in a lab, nothing physical, just rejection, and scanned their brains. The anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, the same regions that process physical pain, lit up like a wound. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a broken arm and being ignored, and that's not a flaw. It's a 50,000-year-old survival mechanism, doing exactly what it was built to do, except it was built for a world where exclusion from the tribe meant death by winter or wolf, not a world where exclusion means a comment with fewer likes than expected. But there's a deeper layer here that neuroscience only recently uncovered. That same social reward system, the one that fires when you receive approval, runs on dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in addiction. Which means, quite literally, that the chase for approval can function as a behavioral addiction. Every like, every compliment, every well done is a small dose. And like every addiction, it demands larger doses over time to produce the same effect. That's why a compliment that thrilled you 5 years ago barely registers today. Not because you changed, because the system demands more. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, almost 2,000 years ago, identified this exact trap. Most men, he said, don't live according to their own nature. They live according to the opinion of others. He wasn't talking about vanity. He was describing a hidden tax on every decision you make. Think of a man working a job he despises, only because it carries status in front of his family. Think of a man buying a car he can't afford, just to be seen a certain way by neighbors who statistically are far too busy worrying about their own image to notice his. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If no one ever knew about your effort, none of it, would you still do what you do? Hold that answer, because in the next section, we're going to expose exactly how much of your daily life is being spent on an audience that isn't even paying attention. Here's a truth that's going to sting. Every time you feel an urgent need to prove something to someone, there's insecurity behind it. It's not the strong man who needs to prove strength. It's the insecure man who needs to appear strong. Epictetus taught his students something almost brutal in its simplicity. If someone speaks badly of you and it's true, correct yourself. If it's a lie, laugh. Most people do the exact opposite. They argue against lies with anger and ignore truths with defensiveness, because the ego doesn't want truth. It wants protection. There's a story about Diogenes, the cynic philosopher, that illustrates this in an almost comical way. Diogenes lived in a barrel in the public square of Athens, owning almost nothing. One day, Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the known world, came to visit him. Curious about this philosopher, no one could intimidate. Alexander asked what he could do for him. Anything. Riches, land, protection. Diogenes replied, "You could move a little. You're blocking my sun." That wasn't arrogance. It was the complete absence of any need to impress even the most powerful man on earth. And that's exactly why this story has survived 23 centuries, because it shows the absolute opposite of what most of us do every day, shaping our behavior, our words, even our life decisions based on who's watching. Now picture this. A man is at a family gathering. Someone throws a sarcastic comment about a decision he made years ago, out of context, meant purely to provoke. He has two options. He can spend the next hour explaining himself, defending, justifying, draining his own energy and poisoning the room. Or he can smile, say maybe, and move on, without needing that one relative's approval to know he made the right call. The second option isn't surrender. It's understanding something most men never grasp. Winning that argument isn't worth the price of his own peace. There's a psychological pattern almost no video on this topic addresses, and it might be the most dangerous one of all. What psychologists call rejection sensitivity, the tendency to interpret any absence of approval as active rejection. A man sends a message. He doesn't get a reply within 2 hours. A brain trained by years of seeking validation doesn't interpret this as the person is busy. It interprets it as abandonment. This creates a destructive cycle: anxiety, reassurance-seeking behavior, sending more messages, demanding explanations. The other person pulls away even further, sensing the weight of that neediness. The perceived abandonment confirms itself, even though it never actually existed. Epictetus had a phrase for this, adapting his central principle. Disturbance doesn't come from events, but from the judgment we make about them. Someone's silence is a neutral fact. The meaning of abandonment is a story you construct yourself and then suffer from as if it were true. This doesn't mean repressing the human need for connection. That would be naive and false to claim. It means stopping the outsourcing of your emotional stability to the unpredictable behavior of other people. There's a confidence that needs a stage, and there's a confidence that needs no witnesses. The first is fragile. It depends on constant recognition to stay alive. Remove the applause, and it collapses. You've seen this. People endlessly posting achievements, trips, bodies, money. The moment engagement drops, something in them visibly empties out. The second is solid, built from proof you gave yourself, not others. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen, wrote his private journal with zero intention that anyone would ever read it. He didn't need to prove anything to anybody. He already ruled the known world, and yet, every single night, he sat down and interrogated his own conduct, his own mistakes, not to perform virtue, to correct it. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That single sentence contains the entire difference between two completely different lives. The man who asks, "What will they think of me?" and the man who asks, "Am I acting in accordance with who I decided to be?" are building two entirely different foundations. One collapses the moment the audience leaves. The other doesn't even notice the audience is gone. Think of two types of entrepreneurs. The first constantly posts about his success, cars, results, winner's mindset. The second builds silently, and when asked how business is going, answers in 3 dry sentences and gets back to work. Which of the two, statistically, would you bet is closer to bankruptcy? Behavioral research on this is nearly unanimous. Excessive display of success frequently correlates with underlying financial or emotional insecurity. It's compensation, not celebration. Let's put a number on this, because abstract philosophy is easy to nod along to and forget by tomorrow. Imagine you have 100% of your daily energy available. How much of it goes into decisions filtered through other people's opinions? The clothes chosen for how they'll be perceived. the career picked for family approval, the words swallowed out of fear of seeming difficult, the relationship kept out of fear of judgment for ending it. Add it up, and you'll find a frighteningly large percentage of your actual life is being spent performing for an audience that, statistically, barely exists. Here's the uncomfortable math. Research on self-perception consistently shows people wildly overestimate how much others notice or remember their actions. A phenomenon researchers call the spotlight effect. You are not nearly as watched as you feel, which means most of the energy you're spending managing your image is being spent for nobody. That's not depressing. It's the most liberating math you'll do all year because it means you have far more freedom than you think. But knowing this intellectually and actually living differently are two separate skills. So let's build the second one. There's an area of life where this need for approval causes the most silent, lasting damage: romantic relationships. Men who never learn to exist without constant approval tend to repeat a specific pattern in relationships. They constantly seek validation from their partner and mistake it for intimacy. They ask repeatedly, "Are you sure everything's okay?" and need constant reassurance. And paradoxically, that's exactly what pushes away the very person they most want to keep close. Nobody deep down wants a partner who needs them to feel whole. People are drawn to solidity, not to neediness. Musonius Rufus, a lesser-known Roman Stoic who taught even women something revolutionary for his time, said virtue doesn't depend on external circumstances, including the approval of those we love. Love fully, he said, but never to the point where your inner stability depends on the other person's reaction. This isn't coldness. It's the only kind of love that manages to last, because it doesn't collapse at the first crisis, the first silence, the first disagreement. This isn't solved with a 5-minute pep talk. It's built through repetition. 6 specific practices. First, do good things without telling anyone. Help someone without posting it. Train without sharing it. This rebuilds your internal reward circuit. You relearn to feel good for doing right, not for being seen doing right. Second, receive criticism without defending yourself immediately. Next time someone points out a mistake, resist the urge to justify. Just listen. Say thank you. Evaluate later with a clear head. This breaks the automatic ego defense reflex, and it will feel deeply unnatural the first few times. That discomfort is the muscle actually being built. Third, sometimes choose the harder, quieter path, and tell no one you did it. Let the act be its own reward. Fourth, write down who you want to be, not who you want others to think you are. That distinction in language changes everything. One traps you in external approval, the other anchors you in internal values. Fifth, deliberately reduce your exposure to social comparison. Much of modern hunger for approval is fed by an endless feed of other people's curated lives. Cutting that exposure isn't denial, it's mental hygiene. Sixth, practice the funeral test. Ancient Stoics frequently imagined their own death as a philosophical exercise, not out of morbidity, but for clarity. Ask yourself, in the final hours of my life, which approvals I chased today will have mattered? Almost none. This exercise instantly repositions what's urgent and what's just social noise. The first effect is internal silence. That anxious voice constantly calculating reactions. It fades. The second is a massive return of energy. Everything you used to spend managing perception becomes available to actually build something real. The third is the strangest one, and the one nobody expects. The less you need other people's respect, the more of it you receive. People sense, almost instinctively, when they're in the presence of someone solid. Solidity attracts. Neediness repels. The fourth, the deepest one, is peace. Not the peace of feeling nothing, The peace of no longer needing anyone else's verdict to know exactly who you are. There's a fifth effect, the rarest of all. You become capable of loving and connecting more genuinely, because your relationships stop being transactional. I behave this way to receive approval, and become real. I behave this way because it's who I am, and you can stay or go. My stability doesn't depend on it. This is what the Stoics called ataraxia, not the absence of emotion, but a serenity that can't be hijacked by external circumstances. Go back to that French officer in 1780. He spent the rest of his life knowing something most of us die without ever discovering, that real victory isn't the one others applaud. It's the one you win when nobody is watching, and you still choose to act according to who you decided to be. This isn't about stopping caring for people. It's about stopping outsourcing to them the verdict on who you are. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight. Where in your life are you performing for an audience that barely exists? Pick one situation today, one where you'd normally react seeking approval, and simply don't. Notice the discomfort. Notice that you survive it.